Hello everybody, this is Sergio Explains, and today I am making this video to explain why Jack Daniels is not a bourbon. I'm sure you heard about this before, and everybody has an opinion, and some of them are really qualified opinions with knowledge of what's going on, but even those might learn something from what I have to say today. So let me tell you from the beginning why I decided to do this video. I was at a wedding the other day, and they had a little open bar. That some free stuff, and they didn't have anything too exclusive. And I usually go for Jack Daniels or whiskey in general. And the options were, they had two whiskeys only. They had a Black Label, Johnny Walker Black Label Scotch whiskey. It's a blend. And they also had good old Jack Daniels, all number 7. So my friend and I approached the bar, and he asked for the Johnny Walker, and I asked for a Jack Daniels. And open bar at a wedding, you do not have to pay, but there is a tip jar. So I usually tip $1 on the first one, $2 on the second one, $3 on the third one, and so on, if I'm pleased with the service, of course. So he gave me a nice dram of all number 7, and I enjoyed it. And I tipped $1, and then they put a lot of ice usually. So I was like, next time I'll say not so much ice. And I approached them again, and I said, I'd like another whiskey. And he just looked at me and said, like, you mean you want a bourbon? And I was like, oh my God, this is so wrong in so many levels. I don't even know where to start. Because even if Jack Daniels is not a bourbon, but even if it was a bourbon, suppose I was drinking a bourbon, Woodford Reserve, double oaked or something. I could still call it a whiskey, because all bourbons are whiskey. It's bourbon whiskey, So by me saying a whiskey, you don't have to correct me saying, oh, you mean a bourbon. And that's the first thing. And secondly, Jack Daniels is not a bourbon. And then, here's the thing. There are many discussions about it. Let me show you what discussion I had with this particular person, because there are different levels of confusion. When I told him, Jack Daniels is Tennessee whiskey, it's not a bourbon, and he was like, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm a bartender. I passed the bartender final exams, and I got my license, so I know what I'm talking about. And I said, but all you have to do is look at the label. I asked for a whiskey, and it says whiskey, and you're telling me it's a bourbon, and it doesn't say bourbon anywhere on the label. And he's like, I don't even have to look at the label. I know, I'm a bartender. I passed the license. I was like, okay, so I was thinking to myself, first of all, if you work for tips, do not contradict your clients. And if you have to, for some reason, correct or contradict, first of all, make sure that you know what you're talking about. And secondly, do it in a nicer manner. This guy was being arrogant. And I was like, man, if this guy, I don't know, they got to make that bartender exam a little bit more difficult, a little bit more exclusive. It seems to me that they're giving bartender licenses out to everybody lately, so that's what I was thinking. I was just like, okay, I don't argue with fools, and all I said, well, he gave it to me, he didn't get a tip, and I said, you got a phone, you Google it, So when I came back for my third one, he was like, that is so weird. Why would it not be he realized that I was right, and he was like, why would it not be a bourbon? And at that moment, I realized I had heard this before from people who don't know much about whiskeys in general, especially people from other countries. In other countries, they have, let's say, Johnny Walker Black Label and Jack Daniels, and they call Scotch whiskey Scotch, and they call American whiskeys bourbons. So they think, generally speaking, people who don't know much about whiskey, they think that a whiskey made in the United States, it's called a bourbon, and that the word for whiskey here is bourbon, and all the whiskeys in the United States are bourbon. And that is just not correct. In the United States, we make bourbons, and we make other whiskeys that are not bourbons, including rye whiskey, for example, and other whiskeys like Tennessee whiskey. So, this takes me to the actual definition of bourbon. And here is where most of you that are Jack Daniels enthusiasts and collectors and drinkers would know more than this. And let's talk about that. The thing is, most people will know that Jack Daniels is not a bourbon, and they will think somewhat correctly that the reason why it's not a bourbon, it's because of the filtration method. And that is correct up to some point, depending how you look at it. Jack Daniels itself, in its website, says that what makes us unique is our filtration method. And the filtration method is after distillation, before putting it into the barrels for aging, it is filtered through 10 feet of packed charcoal, maple wood charcoal. And this is called a mellowing process that makes the whiskey very smooth. And so it is different from other whiskeys in general, including bourbon whiskey, because of that filtration method. But let's talk about what it means being a bourbon. The definition of a bourbon is it has to be a whiskey made in the United States. Check. It has to be distilled at most at 80% alcohol volume. Check. It has to be put in the barrel at most at an alcohol percentage volume of 62.5%. Check. And it has to be aged in new charred oaked barrels. Check. That's the definition of a bourbon. The bourbon definition doesn't specify any filtration method. A bourbon can be totally straight from the barrel on one end, totally unfiltered, and on the other end, you could run through the charcoal mellowing process like Jack Daniels does, and it'll still be called a bourbon. So there is no specification for filtration for a bourbon. So why is Jack Daniels not a bourbon? That is a fair question, and this is why so many people are confused. People think that if you check all those boxes, you have to be called a bourbon. And that is not so. If you check all those boxes, you can be called a bourbon. It's like being part of a group. You could be accepted to that group if you're 21 years old, and if you're born in the United States, and if you meet certain requirements, you can be in that group. But you don't have to be in that group if you don't want to, even if you have all those requirements. This is exactly what's going on with Jack Daniels. And when I say Jack Daniels, I mean about all number 7, Gentleman Jack, single barrel, and other expressions. But of course, not all Jack Daniels. For example, Jack Daniels has a rye, and that would never be called a bourbon. Could not, because the percentage of rye is higher than allowed. Or the unrested, for example, it could not be a bourbon because it needs to be aged. But Jack Daniels could be a bourbon. It has everything. It just doesn't want to be a bourbon, and that's just it. Jack Daniels has the option of being called a bourbon, and they just choose not to. Why? Because we have a specific filtering method that makes us unique, and we want to be unique. We don't want to be just like any other bourbon. And let me tell you, the question is why it's not a bourbon. It's like, why would I? Why would I want to be a bourbon? You know, and the answer to that seems to me, it's like we want to distinguish ourselves. 95% of bourbon is made in Kentucky, and this is Tennessee whiskey. So, you know, we are Tennessee whiskey. We want to be Tennessee whiskey, and that's the end of the story. I live in Florida, and I could make a Florida whiskey or a bourbon if I wanted to. You know, if I check those boxes I mentioned earlier, that's it. I make it under those specifications. I have the option of calling it bourbon whiskey, or I could call it Florida. This is a good idea. I could start. I hadn't thought of that before. I could make me some. I can distill me some Florida whiskey. Hey, honey, let's buy some stills tomorrow morning. And you know, you've been looking here at my copita. This is the copita that one like it, not it. I have more than one. Don't think I'm using yours and I'm gonna send you a used copita. This is the copita that I will give it away for free this weekend. So if you want to have a chance to earn this, win this, not earn it, win this Jack Daniel's Single Barrel Select Copita, very collectible and cool for drinking. I will be giving it away together with this mini tin collectible from the United Kingdom, the year 2011. I'll be giving it away only to the members of my Jack Daniels group in Facebook called Jack Daniels Collectibles. So there's still time. If you want to have a chance at winning one of these, I'll be giving them away soon. So anything else until I hope I don't stir a lot of controversy with this video. I'm just trying to educate people, and I know that some of you know more than I do. If you do, and if you think that I'm wrong with something that I'm saying, be nice. Say it nicely to me. Don't be like that arrogant bartender. So until then, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, Sergio Explains, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.